today I'm going to talk about something around diabetes prevention, and the process is called Preview. It's prevention of diabetes through lifestyle intervention, and published studies in Europe and around the world. So this is a very big study. It's a €9 million FP7 project, which involves 15 partners and an intervention running now in 9 countries, because we're also running a small group in Swansea. I want to cover a few things, and that's some of the issues behind diabetes and some of the evidence base I thought may be interesting, or a reminder for people if you've not seen this before. So looking at preventing this, the prevalence and some significant issues, the concept of Preview. By the way, Preview is coded. We can't give away any real detail in terms of results yet in relation to the design, so apologies for that in advance. What the intervention is like, and the design is quite interesting. It's called a fading intervention, for those of you who may have or may not have seen this before. The recruitment pathway for doing something like this is quite interesting to learn from, certainly. The focus will be on physical activity, although clearly in a diabetes prevention project, there are 2 major arms. One is nutrition, the other is physical activity. We'll focus on some of the physical activity, and I'll summarize hopefully towards the end. So first of all, this is the sort of seminal study by Nola et al. Looking at diabetes prevention. What's very clear from this slide, if you can see this, we've got an intervention, a pharmacological intervention using metformin, quite standard, and a lifestyle intervention and a placebo effect. Run it's an RCT, just for 1,000 participants, and following up over 4 years, look at the cumulative incidence of diabetes as a percentage. And really clear from this study is the fact that drugs clearly don't work as well as lifestyle. In fact, there's a significant difference. There's a stepwise effect. Placebo, you know, the way to go. Metformin has an effect, but lifestyle cumulatively ends up with fewer people with diabetes at the end of 4 years. And if we look at the diabetes prevention study as well, which is going to take a bit more detail in relation to that study by Nola. This then says, okay, let's start off this time by managing the overweight population and ask them to lose between 5 and 10 kilograms of their body weight to get themselves into around the overweight category, around about 25, a BMI of about 25. And let's adjust the diet more precisely. And then let's look at sort of quantifying or giving some guidance this time and tailoring that for individuals. So an literature study published in the Lancet 2006 came out with the same effect. Okay, this graph's the other way around, by the way. So this is the probability to remain without type 2 diabetes. Okay, so the control group, more people got diabetes. Okay, this is the probability than the intervention group did. So the same message. So basically, lifestyle, adjusting diet and physical activity helps. But where do we go now with this? Well, what sort of diet? What diet's most effective here? Let's look at the diet in a bit more detail. So the Diagene study, which was a precursor to the Preview study, Thomas Meinhardt is on the Preview study, used that approach and asked the population to lose 8% of their body mass over 8 weeks. Quite a challenge. Now that's on a low-calorie diet, usually the Cambridge diet. And I've got no links with the Cambridge diet plan, by the way, so no conflict of interest there for me. And so those who lost that weight were then randomized to these 5 groups. Low protein, high glycemic index, control, high protein, high glycemic index, low protein, low glycemic index, and high protein, low glycemic index. The only group to sustain their body weight over 6 months were this group. So there's something inside the diet now which is kind of going to be more successful potentially at sustaining that weight loss compared to these other diets. So a much better link between the exposure and the response for diet. So Preview is kind of building on that part. Then the other final bit in the lit review, there's a study by Humar, who's a bit of a demigod in terms of some of the physiology behind exercise and diet and diabetes. Sorry, really. So Humar ran this is wrong, but we had a 6-month study, a small group of sedentary, overweight men and women. But he asked them to accumulate certain degrees of activity over that 8 months. So one group walked for 19 kilometers, that's around about 12 miles a week, and expended 1,200 calories in doing so. The jogging, they increased the intensity here, okay? Jogging for 90 kilometers, but clearly that took a lot less in terms of time, okay, because you're going to run it, so you're going to do it more quickly. And then increased to about 20 miles a week, okay, jogging for the same duration as walking. And what he found was that insulin sensitivity increased in those 3 groups compared with control, but actually duration was pretty more important than intensity here. So the big question now, is it duration, intensity, what's the mix like? Well, overall, the mix is pretty good. Okay, so insulin sensitivity went up, whatever group you were in. It just seemed that duration, or expending about 2,000 kilocalories per week in exercise, was more important than spending about 1,200 kilocalories per week in exercise. So then you move on to what the guidelines then in terms of these sorts of exercise prescription. So Nick's been involved with this, so have I over the years, and so for adults it's 150 minutes per week of at least moderate intensity in 10-minute chunks, or 75 minutes of high intensity activity. That's isocaloric. So we get the same amount of energy expended, about the same as the Humard study, okay, or a mixture of them both. So previews building on this as well. So previews picking up a little bit from this aspect, looking at groups who take part in high intensity or moderate intensity, and back to that Diogenes story, low protein, so high protein, low glycemic index, or a normal type diet. So the objective, therefore, is to determine the preventative effect of those types of doses, both the dietary dose and the intensive exercise dose, over 3 years. So this is a long study. It's an RCT study running, as I said before, in 9 countries. Excuse the text-heavy slide. I don't usually do text-heavy slides. So this is, as far as we're aware, the largest RCT of its kind, bigger than the look-ahead study run in North America. There are 4 intervention groups, men and women, and 2 age groups. Children and adolescents, which is an exploratory study, and adults and elderly. So to start off with, there's a pre-screening effect. We'll look at how this went in a little while. So by phone or email, it's the Finnish diabetes risk score greater than 12. If you're greater than 12, you're invited in to undertake an oral glucose tolerance test. If you then are either fasting glucose impaired, or you're looking at glucose intolerant, then you'll be invited to participate in the study. Okay, so there's an estimation around about 1,800. We need about 1,800 participants to make this to have this powered correctly. And the end point were those people who, over the 3 years, ended up with diabetes. That's our end point. So who in these groups will actually get diabetes, and therefore you can compare the prevalence of that between groups. And the secondary endpoints were anthropometry, risk markers in blood, urine, there were fecal samples, physical activity, diet, sleep, stress, and behavior. So here's the study design. So high intensity with high protein, moderate protein with high intensity, high protein with moderate intensity, or moderate protein with moderate intensity. So we're looking at those 3 groups, taking a pathway through 3 years, okay, of an intervention, and then looking how many of those pop out with diabetes over that time. Let's move on. So the studies run across these countries. There are 9 of them, as I said before. 2 outside Europe, including Sydney in Australia and Auckland in New Zealand. Nottingham and Swansea in the UK arms of the project. Nottingham taking the adult group and Swansea the children's group. Screening. So first of all, how do you capture around 2,000 people who are going to have lost that weight and will have failed, so they will be glucose impaired or glucose intolerant? Well, first of all, advertisements by newspaper, email to study coordinators, and then of course we'll have a lot of people who aren't eligible. The phone call to participants, okay, asking questions about your risks, your diagnosis, other sorts of things, were over the telephone. Then, of course, those who had a score greater than 12 on the thin risk assessment were invited into the lab. They had to took an oral glucose tolerance test. If they failed, if they were impaired, they went into the study, and there was another arm from a GP. If a GP found, for example, one of their patients previously they were glucose intolerant while fasting impaired glucose, then they were also invited into the study. So a series of very significant and important steps that need to be taken before these participants even started the project. At that point, they still weren't randomly assigned to one of those 4 groups. They then had to lose 8% of their body mass in 8 weeks. So they started a low-calorie diet phase here, they went with weight reduction, and they ended at this point. And those who made 8% weight loss were entered into the study. So painstakingly difficult to do, but really important in terms of the study design. What we've got here is we've got 3 years of a study, and this just shows when the measurements were taken. So the metabolic measures, physical activity measures, fecal samples, fitness, etc. taken across CIDs, which are called clinical investigation days, between 2 points. And physical activity, I've just shown 2, were measured at baseline and measured at 6 months, and we do take at various points afterwards. I'll just be showing some data between these points, actually, which is why I've highlighted them. So what about the intervention itself? Okay. Now what fits your busy schedule better? Exercising 1 hour a day or being there 24 hours a day. Not quite that bad, but certainly the risks are pretty significant for contracting diabetes. So first of all, we were responsible in Swansea for writing the physical activity guidance program, and it was translated into the languages for each of the countries. And there were special guidance books for high intensity and moderate intensity, separate ones for adults and for children. Okay. This gives us a bit of the design. So for the first year, these were clinical investigation days we just looked at. Okay, so they were screened, they went through the low calorie phase, then they entered and were assessed for those measures at various points in the first year, the second year, and the third year. What's really interesting about this intervention, it's not a training program. Okay? It's not a training program. Because it's fading. So to start with, in the first 3 months, there were group visits, counselling sessions with exercise nutrition counsellors, once every 2 weeks. So for the first 3 months, there was once every 2 weeks. Then, between 3 and 6 months, there were monthly visits, so it fades. Then, in the second year, there were visits every 6 months for the middle phase. And then there's a bit of a year gap between 25 and 36 months. So the resource intensity was at the very beginning. Okay, so it's about changing behaviour as opposed to holding people's hands. And the guidance was using materials, both dietary and exercise, using those booklets to try and get people to take hold of what they did. And it was supported by a very detailed behaviour change approach created by a group in Stuttgart. Right. So, really, when you look at behaviour change, therefore, what we're asking people to do in those behaviour change sessions, they were asked a goal set. They even had to audit their activity opportunities in their environment. When you open your curtains in the morning, what activity opportunities do you see? Not what gyms have you got. What do you see? Some people say they don't see anything. You know, so that's a really interesting question to ask people. They're then asked to go around and audit their activity opportunities in their environment, and then make use of them. Okay, so that's the kind of approach. Goal setting, self-regularization, focusing on the behaviour. Okay, so lots of stuff psychologically used within this program that we'll talk about later. How do you maintain activity? Increasing frequency of contact. In this case, that's what the literature says, but preview was actually decreasing the frequency of contact over time. And making sure families were supportive of their participants. And it's about being active your way. Okay? It's about being active your way. So people making decisions, you've got people making decisions in Sofia in Bulgaria, or in Sydney, Australia. You can't prescribe the exact exercise program for these people. It's about engaging with what they've got on offer to them. And what we did was we used the compendium of physical activities to try to give choice. This is the diet of activity that was offered to them. This is what they chose from. And they could look at the MET value to choose. If I was in the high intensity group, I'm looking for these activities which are above 6 METs. If I'm in the moderate intensity arm, I'm looking for these type of activities. And we talked about frequency, intensity, time and type, or the FIT principle with them. You know, how often, how hard, how long have you got, or what time is going to be enjoyable for you, or what's available to you, or what can you afford, who can you do, what can you do with a friend, and so on and so forth. And we color-coded those as well then. So, you know, so the high intensity group were choosing reds, the moderate intensity were choosing blues, and they were all looking to decrease the blacks. Okay, that was the kind of general guidance you would give. So if you're working as a surgeon, as a GP, you know, this might be something which people would do. So what happened with the flow with all this? Well, first of all, over 50,000 people have been contacted, okay, across those centres. 18,000 were pre-screened. 2,500 were eligible for the weight reduction phase. Most of those did actually lose 8% of their body weight in 8 weeks, which is quite impressive. So just under 2,000 were randomised to those 4 arms. Okay, so around about 450 or so, or just about 450 randomised to the 4 arms. And the study's allowing for a 20% dropout early on, and as people stay in, we hypothesise that fewer will drop out. Okay, so that's the design. So I'm just going to show a little bit about the physical activity measurement, because in Swansea we do this in some detail. In fact, it overlaps a bit with Chris Barnes' study in some respects, believe it or not. He was talking about load. This does that. So some of you may know this. This is an accelerometer. It measures activity. You can record it every second if you want to, and quantifies the behaviour. And this is what you get over a week. And then what is while they were sleeping as well, by the way. So it's called an Actisleep. So you can see the days. Look, that's day 1, day 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Blue is when they weren't wearing it, and these are the sleep periods. And then generally, for those who don't know, we put threshold lines across, and time spent above black was above sedentary, between blue and red was moderate activity, and above red was vigorous or high intensity activity. So we quantify this for each person, and they'll wear this for 7 days, for each of those clinical investigation times over 3 years. So quite detailed from an activity measurement perspective. We also ask people to record their data, and these are some of the activities they get involved in. And so far, there's an online system for this. So far, across those participants, 1,850, there have been 150,000 records put onto their personal physical activity log. So we collect a hell of a lot of data, which is telling us not just the intensity of activity, we also have got an idea about the type of activity that they're engaging in. So these are the outcomes we get. And the other thing, by the way, is that the minimum wear time is 10 hours, and that affects how you interpret the results. And again, I won't get into too much detail about that. But clearly, you know, if you're looking for people engaging in 150 minutes a week of activity, then wear time will affect that. If you take it off a lot, you're less likely to capture that activity. So, just some results then. So, changes in sedentary time. So, this is from baseline to 6 months. So, what's happened? And I'll have to hide the centres, but you can see these are different countries, okay? Basically, and you don't know who they are. But there's been a decrease in sedentary time. We haven't run any statistical analysis on this. I'm just showing the descriptive data so far. What's happened to moderate and vigorous activity? Consistently, that's gone up. Okay, from what would be a low level in this country here, around 80 minutes up to under half an hour. These groups seem to have been active already, though. But every country seems to have produced, or the first 6 months, increased the moderate and vigorous physical activity. When you look at moderate activity, remember what the design is. There's a group looking to increase moderate, and a group looking to increase vigorous or high intensity. So there's been a similar sort of increase in minutes per day of moderate. And the same thing with vigorous. So vigorous as well, an increase in vigorous activity. So I've not given you the breakdown for those groups because I'm not allowed to. That will happen until 2018. But there's been an increase. But if you look at the scale, there's very little vigorous activity going on. And even as we move forward, we're not increasing vigorous activity by very many minutes at all. And in fact, that's consistent with previous studies, but it's very hard to increase vigorous physical activity. And in some respects, compliance, or it's worse, you get bigger dropout or higher levels of dropout. So, in summary then, so recruitment is challenging. 18,000 screened and 1,800 got into the study for this sort of thing. So 1 in 10. On the other hand, really good message. It seems that over 80% of those who did try to lose 8% of their body weight succeeded in that over 8 weeks. So that's a pretty important message. The worrying thing so far for the study design team is that there are very few cases of type 2 diabetes emerging. Anyway. So we're not actually getting much of an outcome for this because the people aren't sort of seem to be present themselves with diabetes. Dropout is a concern, so this is an intention to treat model, and we're going to be interested to see what we get at the end. But there is, as we're getting, some other participants are getting towards the end of the second year of the intervention, and because it's a failing intervention, we're finding higher than we like levels of dropout so far, and we're trying to find ways to try and keep people in the study. And if it's an intention to treat model, of course, you want to bring those people back who have dropped out at the very end of the study to keep your statistical power up. The behavior modification support materials from qualitative process evaluation are actually working. Okay, they are working. People are changing their behaviors. So in that sense, that's really important from a delivery perspective because it's a failing intervention. So where people are taking part, they are seeming to engage with the materials and changing their diet and their physical activity. Sedentary time decreased and physical activity increased. So that's the overview so far of what is a pretty large diabetes prevention project. Encouraging results certainly initially. Interesting that the intervention is fading. There'll be more to report on this as we move forward. And thank you for your time in listening.